The second session is all about how taking your life and making it purposeful. And I'm the epitome of that. I was a prosecutor before I became a judge, and my sole job as a prosecutor was to lock up people with substance use disorders and make sure that our community was safe by taking people with addictions off the streets. And I was proud of that. I thought I was doing a great service for our community. Little did I know that all I was doing was locking up people with an illness, and that it was exacerbating that illness, and that most of them, upon release from jail, would go back out within a 72-hour period of time, and they would commit the same crimes again because their addiction was not treated, it was just contained, and it grew while they were incarcerated. Then I became a judge, and I took those same feelings about addiction to the bench with me, and I locked up hundreds of young people and older people that were suffering from a substance use disorder. And I was also very proud of that career, thinking that once again, I was keeping our community safe, that I was sparing all of you from having to come in contact with people with substance use disorder, and that we could contain the problem and rid our society of substance use if we could just lock up enough people. I was wrong. And I'm not proud of that part of my career. Then, 13 years ago, I experienced addiction firsthand because a number of young people in my community were dying of overdoses to substances like heroin and prescription drugs. And those were young people that I knew, that I respected, that I knew came from good families with good friends. They were A students, athletes, and all of a sudden, I was having to lump them into a category of people that I thought were moral failures. I was wrong. They were not moral failures. They too had a disease. And then I experienced that same situation firsthand when I learned that a child of mine, a teenager, became addicted to opiates. It started with a knee surgery and exacerbated into full-blown addiction that almost took her life. It was devastating. And for all the years that I worked in substance use as a prosecutor and as a judge, I never had a clue what families and people suffering from substance use disorders went through. But I got a quick teaching, a quick schooling on exactly what it meant to be. I remember a trip to a hospital where I was called a pathetic mom crying over their junkie child. And I don't think I've ever felt so belittled and so hurt from those words. And yet I had used those same words to describe people that appeared in front of me, not understanding the illness of addiction and what it could do to an individual. I didn't realize that those individuals were no different than me, and that once they got a disease, it took who they were and it changed them from the inside out. It took honest, healthy people and turned them into criminals, people that would rob you for their next fix, people that would break into your car, people that would steal from their mothers and their grandmothers. And they would do that because the need for that substance was so strong. It's the most misunderstood disease in our culture, and yet it is one that is lurking behind the doors of almost every household. It may surprise you to realize that we lose 3,000 people a year to addiction in Michigan alone, and that since the opiate crisis started, we've lost over 400,000 citizens in the United States to overdoses to prescription drugs. And yet there is very little done that really changes the tide of that, because after all, it's just those junkies that are dying. But those junkies are now becoming our children. They're becoming our neighborhood kids. It's become such a big epidemic in the United States that each and every one of us is being affected by this addiction. It costs the United States $8.6 billion a year because of in and out treatment, because of the theft that's occurring, because of the police hours that are taking place. And I work with thousands of people that are affected by addiction. So that's my history. And here's how so many of us that have been affected by this at a personal level have turned our story into resilience. When I was told I was going to talk about resilience, I thought, well, how does that fit? Because I never really thought about the resilience in our organization. But back 11 years ago, there were a number of families in our community that were suffering with addiction of their children right in their own homes. And we decided to form a town hall meeting where we would come together and start talking about this, because addiction is a silent epidemic. It's something that people are shameful for, and they don't really speak out about it because speaking out about it isolates you. I was an elected official, and to be honest with you, I thought if I talked about this openly, nobody would ever vote for me again. Here I am making decisions about your lives, and my own personal life is in chaos. And yet I found that it was very different, that once I began speaking about my issues, I met people across the country that were being affected by addiction in their homes, and they were just too afraid to talk about it. And so we built an organization. We came together in the basement of a church, and we started talking about solutions. And our number one goal was to change the stigma of addiction. That's a big, tall order, because I can bet that most of you, if you've not been affected, see the guy under the bridge with the sign saying, "Please feed me," and that's what we think of addiction. But that's addiction at its worst end. The addiction before that lurks in our homes, and it isolates, and it quiets us. And that's why it's become so big in our nation. I could do hours talking about how we got here, but I just briefly want to tell you that the United States consumes 90% of all opiates that are produced worldwide, and we make up less than 5% of the population. We are a pill-popping nation. We take pills for everything. We take pills to wake up in the morning, to go to sleep at night. We take pills when we're not happy enough. We take pills when we're too happy. And we take pills even to the extent that when God is telling us it's time to slow down sexually, we just pop a pill and keep going. So when we wonder why our children have problems with trying substances, we've taught them that behavior. I'm going to age myself, but when I was growing up, we had one pharmacy in our city, and it was, you walked into Benson's, and it was a cabinet that stood about this tall, about as wide as this red carpeting that I'm standing on, with 3 shelves. And every pill that you could buy, both over the counter and prescriptions, were on those 3 shelves. Now we're like gas stations. We have pharmacies on every corner, and every store has a pharmacy in it. And there's rows and rows and rows of pills that you can buy for whatever ails you. And our children see us taking those. So instead of dealing with problems in a more holistic, healthy way, we just pop pills for them. And then we wonder why we have a nation of children that trust that pill taking is safe, and that because doctors have written an abundance of them over the years, enough to give each and every one of us opiates around the clock for 30 days. That's how many pills are written in the United States for every adult to have an endless supply, and we wonder why our children are become addicting to pills. Well, journeys through addiction are really sad, and I meet parents every day that have lost their children. I'm one of the lucky ones. I have a child that will be celebrating 10 years of being opiate-free this year. But I will tell you, if it wasn't for my persistence, for our family having resources, I don't believe that child would be alive today. But I learned something, that I had a strength in me and a purpose that I didn't even know existed. I remember a counselor telling me one day that I was going to look at my child's addiction as a blessing in my life. And I thought that person must be high on something. because I could not imagine that this would ever give me purpose, but it has. And my purpose, even though I don't worry on a daily basis about my child anymore, I don't want you to worry about yours. And it's lack of education and lack of people speaking out about this problem that has really brought us to the forefront of this epidemic that our country is experiencing. But I'm an eternal optimist. And so what we decided to do as a group is to be proactive in educating our communities. And we educate in almost every venue you can think of. TEDx talks, Lions clubs, Rotary talks. I personally myself do over 200 talks a year on this subject, and we have other people that do equal to that. And we really are changing the face of addiction. It is amazing to me to think back 12 years ago when I literally felt like I was bashing my head against a cement wall every time that I talked about this, to now we are filling rooms with people that want to hear about this topic. We took our small little organization that started in Fraser, Michigan, and we have built a monster of an organization where we have 22 chapters in the state of Michigan right now, one right here in Traverse City. We also have started many programs. We provide a grief group for parents that have lost. And you talk about parents that are resilient. Can you imagine being part of an educational program after losing your child to an addiction where people don't bring casseroles to you when your child dies of an overdose? They're judged. You somehow look at that child as though they had a moral failing and maybe it's just better they're gone. And yet those parents suffer the same pain that a parent who suffers with a child with cancer or diabetes suffer through. And yet because of our stigma of addiction, we look at that disease very differently. We treat people that have it very differently, and we certainly treat families very differently that are raising a child in their midst that has an addiction issue. And it's time for us to change that, because that stigma is what keeps families from being healthy. When I started doing a program for myself, and I did work a 12-step program, and I'm a firm believer that our schools would be a lot better place if we would teach 12 steps meetings there, where every student would learn how to live their life purposefully, how they would learn to surrender, how they would learn that they're not in control, that they would learn that they have to say sorry when they do something wrong, and that they have to give back to their community in some way. Can you imagine what a program like that would do to change the landscape of our community? And it's such an easy process to learn. It certainly changed my life. I will tell you that I wake up every morning knowing exactly what my purpose is. It's to love my family, to love the people around me, and to treat everybody, regardless of where they come from or what disease they might be suffering from, with respect, compassion, and decency. And I will tell you that when I started doing that, I became a happier person. I gave up being a judge to do this work. That's a big step in my career, and I'm proud to be here doing it because someone has to stop the insanity that goes on around addiction. So we started a program 2 years ago, and this was started with passion alone. And I will tell you that our group has grown to where it's at, not because we have a lot of resources and not because we have a lot of money, but because we have a lot of people that have suffered ungodly pain, the death of children, the struggle of addiction, and they have decided to surrender their lives to make sure all of you don't have to go through that same pain. And we have swept the state of Michigan with a program that allows families a safe, non-judgmental place that they can go to talk, that they can go to get information and education on how to deal with this. Because navigating the system of addiction is very different than getting your child care for cancer. We know what to do, and there's no judgment there. Nobody blames a child for getting cancer. Everybody blames a child for becoming an addict. And so we treat them very differently when that occurs. And that stops people from asking for help. So we wanted to make it easy. And we launched a program. We had heard about a program in Massachusetts called the PARI program, where it was a very small community, and a police chief was tired of watching his neighborhood kids die. He said, I just was sick of going to these overdoses and seeing young kids that I knew were wonderful children that were succumbing to addiction. And a lot of them because of a wisdom tooth being pulled or a sports injury. 83% of the people in the United States that become addicted to heroin started with a legal prescription drug, oftentimes written for a sports injury or a wisdom teeth being pulled. And we judge those people as being morally inept. So we started talking to our local police departments, and 2 years ago, we launched a program in Macomb County called Hope Not Handcuffs. We partnered with 17 police departments, and we got police departments to open their doors saying, rather than judge you and incarcerate you, if you'll walk in and say you need help, we will call an angel that will show up to make sure that help is provided for you and that you have a support in the community to navigate the system of recovery. We didn't know if that program would work or not, but in the first 3 months of that program, over 600 people walked through the doors of those police departments and asked for help. And they were met with compassion and kindness by police officers that used to judge them. And the program caught on, so that now we partner with over 70 police departments in 8 different counties, and we have placed over 2,700 people into treatment that would not have had help without the police departments opening their doors and saying, we get it, we were wrong. We're not going to judge you anymore, but we are going to be a conduit for help. I'm running out of time, and I want to leave you with one thought. When I was early in my journey of addiction with my child, I was reading everything I could get my hands on. And I picked up a book called Moments of Clarity. And it was short stories written about people that we admire, actors, maybe not senators, but senators, football players, music stars, a lot of people that we hold in high esteem in our country. And each one of them had succumbed to addiction, and they were writing about how they got substance free. We use the word clean, and I would caution you, that's even a stigma getter, because it denotes that if you are on drugs, you're somehow dirty. And we have to change the language we use if we're going to change the way people look at addiction. So these people had all used substances in their lives, and they talked about holding their friends and watching them die of overdoses, and that did not change their addiction. They talked about being in severe car accidents where they were in comas for days. That did not change them from using substances. They talked about overdosing and being on life support and being brought back again, and then they'd go right back out and they'd use again. And when they were asked, well, what did you get clean for? It was always that one individual approached me, and sometimes I didn't even know that individual, and they saw in me something that I had forgotten existed, and it gave me hope. And when I read those words, I thought, wow, every one of us has the power to be that moment of clarity for someone. That person that can see that person before addiction took hold of their lives and ask them simple questions about what were your dreams before addiction took hold of you? What aspirations did you have? What kind of a person did you want to be? And listen to their answers and then tell them, you know, I can help you get there. I can help you be that person again. If you will just reach out your hand and take mine, I'll show you the route, because you're still that person. You just have a disease. And if we can cure the disease, you can get this person back again. So I ask each and every one of you to stop judging, to stop looking at people with substance use disorders that they somehow are moral failures, and see them for what they really are. that people that have a unique illness, and that if we just take a moment to provide that moment of clarity for them, it might be that moment that turns their lives around and gets them back to being a good son and daughter, brother or sister, grandma or grandpa, or husband or wife. And each one of us has the power to be a moment of clarity. Thank you.